Laura Savino, welcome.
Hi, thank you, Liz. Happy to be here.
We have talked many times in the book club, and so it's really exciting to be able to talk about you and your book this time. Can you give us an overview?
Yeah, sure. My book it's really about the journey to become an airline pilot. And it, all right, so I'm a child of the 60s, back in the day before there was any internet or, really you knew anything outside of your immediate bubble. And I had never met a pilot. I had never met anyone who had ever met a pilot. And back at that time, there really weren't any female pilots. And as far as I knew, there weren't any at all. And it was something that I got into kind of as like a teenage act of rebellion. When I was in high school, I borrowed my mom's station wagon and I went out driving around and I found a small airport and I discovered an FBO, which I had no idea there was any such thing as, small airplanes or FBOs or anything like that. And that's how I initially started flying. It was a secret because at the time it was not something my parents approved of or anybody that I knew would approve of. And because I was kind of a weirdo, like, really, for liking airplanes. And the book just brings you through that journey, how someone can start off not with something not in the cards for them at birth at all, whether it's aviation or whatever it is. It could be anything. For me, my example was aviation, but you can start off anywhere in life and you can put yourself wherever you want to put yourself.
No reason to stay on ground. Lift your hands and you can touch and fly.
Hello and welcome. I'm Liz Booker, host of the Aviatrix Book Club and Aviatrix Book Review website, YouTube channel, and podcast. And I promote books that feature women in aviation as literary aviatrix on social media. I'm thrilled to kick off our third year of fabulous interviews with a highly experienced professional airline pilot, award-winning writer, inspirational speaker, and civilian air medal recipient. Her highly entertaining, exceptionally well-written, and very informative memoir, Jet Boss, a female pilot on taking risks and flying high, is the Aviatrix Book Club discussion book for January 2023. You can find her at her website, laurasavino747.com, and on Instagram and Twitter, where she has over 34,000 followers at laurasavino747.
And the road is easier for some and harder for others, but everything that you want, I think, is possible if you are flexible and just really take the failures in stride and keep moving forward. And then the book brings you how to do that. And then it also brings you through the different culture changes at the airlines from the early 80s to today. Yeah, and it brings you behind the scenes for what pilots like really truly do. The training and the hiring process and what happened to us on 9/11, which really isn't out there, and Frank Lorenzo, and just really inside the cockpit, what pilots really do and what we think and what we feel. And the whole thing is written from a woman's perspective versus the typical guys. It's just about flying. It's a lot of the book is about like feelings and emotions and the lifestyle of being a pilot, not just the job.
You alluded to something there that I think is very important and interesting about the canon of books that feature women in aviation. I've been really working on crafting this narrative that hopefully resonates with a broader audience, and in the hopes that our books will reach many more people outside of aviation than only our little tight-knit group here. And that is that these are human stories. Mm-hmm. That the aviation is the thing that ties it together and is like sort of our common experience, but each one of us has our own life story that is wrapped around that experience, and you certainly have yours. And the thing that you said about really getting us into the culture, that's something that I absolutely loved. You really, really put me there because I have obviously no experience. Yes, I'm a pilot and I can relate to many things that you talk about, but I never worked for the airlines, and you really took us into that world, and I so enjoyed that.
Oh, thanks.
Why did you write this book?
Why did I write it? That's actually a really changing answer. So I started writing this book. The very first chapter that I wrote was a chapter on 9/11, which is actually in the middle of the book. But I wasn't intending to write a book, but I was at our flight training center in school when 9/11 hit. And we were, obviously, it was an incredibly devastating time. And we were, locked there with all these other pilots. One of our instructors from the training center was actually the captain on United 93. And we couldn't go anywhere. Classes were canceled. And I just started writing down, like, what the heck was going on? And I just started pouring out my heart, like on my hotel room stationery, about what was happening. And that kind of led me to writing more about other things that happened, as my career progressed and as time went on. And so initially, I think I was writing it just to vent, to get my emotions out. And then I started writing about behind the scenes, like what, like the icing story, different stories later in the book were all written first. And so my audience was just other pilots or av geeks or someone who really wants to know what the heck goes on. What are pilots really doing? We do a lot more than push an up button and push a down button. And then this was years ago, and then as time evolved, it took me a long time to get this book out. The whole Me Too movement happened, and then my wheels started turning, and I'm thinking, well, my story is more than just about aviation. It's about women in aviation. And I really didn't have that aspect of it in my book until I started to realize that was important. That was important to get that out. And then I think the third motivation, and I think what really, what polished my book, was just this big awareness that there are so few still women pilots. There are so few. And there's more than when I started. When I started, I don't even know if they had statistics. It was like less than 1%. So who even knows how many? It was so few. But even now, I think the final numbers for airline pilots is only like 4.6% are actually commercial airline pilots. And so then the book evolved to, you know what? I can't fly any longer because I hurt my neck and I'm grounded. And I realized that I am now on the other end of that whole system. I am that person that, like, I wish I knew when I was younger, and it's time for me to pass the torch. And so that's what the book really came down to. The real purpose of my book now is trying to get the next generation aware and motivated and energized. And I want girls to know that you can come from any background. Like, I was terrible in math. I really was terrible in math. Like, that's not a joke. And yet, applied math while flying an airplane was pretty common sense and pretty easy. So I want the next generation to understand that this is for them too.
Oh, I love that so much. I love everything that you just said, especially about like the evolution of who your target audience was, and the idea of it, and it's evident in the book, like that, you are trying to demonstrate to someone who maybe doesn't have any exposure to aviation, what is possible. That is something that I'm doing in my book as well, in my fiction novel. I want to tell a story about a girl who doesn't even know that she's interested in aviation. You knew, at least at a young age, that you were interested, even if you didn't have that support network around you, just like I didn't. This idea that, like, there are so many girls out there who just don't even know it's possible.
Right.
And your
They
book
don't.
shows.
Right.
Yeah.
You got to see it to be it in a lot of cases. I mean, it's so true. And if you don't know, I mean, being a pilot is very much a legacy occupation. The majority of pilots, and it is changing, but the majority of pilots came from a family of aviation. And so they are aware. And it's not just being a pilot, it's being a dispatcher, meteorologist, maintenance. I mean, there's a lot of really fantastic STEM careers in aviation that people just don't know about. And, that's what I'm hoping to do, is make that awareness out there.
Well, I will say, I do all these outreach events, and I try to create, curate lists, not only for all of us as adults to read together, but also, books that I think are very appropriate for a target audience. And I always include yours on sort of my young adult and teen, because you spend the first third of the book sharing that experience of your teen years. And you talked about going to this little airport, and just I felt so joyous about the embrace that you received from the general aviation community and how they encouraged you. And as a former military pilot who didn't have that experience when I was young, who is now, as I'm retired, sort of immersing myself in the general aviation community here in South Florida, I have felt that warm embrace also. And it's just lovely, especially, I mean, with what you went through in your career, what I went through in my very competitive world of military aviation, where not everybody was very kind and supportive. It's just lovely. So, talk about that experience.
When I was a teenager, yeah. So all right. So I came from a very traditional Italian Catholic household, and we had very, very rigid gender expectations. I had two older brothers. I have a younger sister, and I was raised, just in a very inflexible environment. I love my parents. Hi, mom and dad. They're great. But they're from a completely different generation, and they were very staunch in their beliefs. And so I grew up believing that I had a very, very narrow path, that God had created me for one mission, and I was Catholic. That was to have lots of babies and take care of my husband and my children, and that was why I was on this planet. And as a kid, I believed that because that's what my mommy and daddy told me, and that's all that I saw, and that's all that I knew. And then as I got older, boy, I got the itch. I just wanted to live life. And I wasn't like into drugs or alcohol or anything like that, but I wanted, like any teenager, I wanted adventure. And so I went out and I found it on my own. And what I discovered at the airport was I ended up going up for a discovery flight, and was mesmerized. Now, of course, this is before the internet. So like, who knew what an airplane looked like? I had no idea. Who knew what the ground looked like from the sky? I had no idea. I'd never seen it before. And so it was just an unbelievable experience. But what was, I think, drew me in even more, Liz, was that aviation community. Is that when I was at the airport, I was no longer this, I had no expectations on me. I could just be whoever I wanted to be. I could like airplanes, I could like flying, I could like math, I could like science, I could like all of that. And it was like totally normal. Nobody looked at me like, I was out of my, crossing the line here, and I needed to be drawn back in. So just that sense of acceptance, that sense of just community, I just soaked it in as a teenager. And I think I loved flying because I loved flying, but I loved flying because I loved the airport. I loved the people at the airport. I loved just being, whoever I was, I could be at the airport, and without anybody, trying to change me or tell me, I couldn't do this or I couldn't do that.
Yeah, and there's this other thing too that I think, when I started this project, a friend of mine said, I was kind of bragging about like how many people sort of flocked to this thing and how fast, and of course, COVID was an element of that. But he said, you have like a captive audience of
Mm-hmm.
like zealous fans, and that is the thing I think that is really fun about this community,
Mm-hmm.
is that if you love aviation, you love
Yeah.
aviation, and
Yeah.
you love to see somebody else equally lit up
Mm-hmm.
about it. So you can be the guy that I fly with right now,
Mm-hmm.
he's a retired Coast Guard helicopter pilot. He started much like you early, in his teens, and was a CFI before he joined. He's a cargo pilot
Mm-hmm.
in his career now. We go gliding, and he literally sounds like a little kid, complete unabashed love for
Yeah.
flying the whole
Mm-hmm.
time. And I love being around that. And so that's what I saw happening for you. Like, you
Mm-hmm.
could be a total geek, and
Mm-hmm.
the more that you were, the
Yeah.
more that people brought you in and supported you.
You actually, you nailed it. That is exactly what happened. Was I just loved it so much, and I just would walk around to hangar and just talk to the mechanics and talk to different pilots, and it was so exciting for me, and it really like was made it more exciting for them. It like I think it brought them back to their younger days when it was all new and fresh and bright and shiny, and for that reason I got lots of free rides, and people would just like sit me down and tell me stories. And the airport I learned how to fly out of, Morristown, was an Army annex and a huge corporate base. So there were all these private corporate jets, and then there was like all this whole military portion of it. So I'd go talk to the GIs that were like working on the airplanes and the helicopters, or I talked to the corporate pilots, and there was a couple of flight schools, and there was the whole community. Everything was there, and where I tell you, I just couldn't get enough of it. It was just so exciting to me, and yeah, it was definitely set me for a lifetime of joy, when it comes to aviation.
Yeah, I like to say that when I retired from, aviation was my first love. I knew when I was 5 that I wanted to be a pilot, and
Mhm.
I didn't know any different, like kind of like you, until, I'm in the middle of my career and people are being weird with me. But so I love to say that my relationship with aviation needed therapy when I retired, and I got that through connecting with you guys. And then when kind of COVID let up and I was able to get into the general aviation community,
Mhm.
that absolutely was the therapy that I needed. Now all of that childhood love and joy is back with me. So I just loved reading that part.
We're all here with you, Liz. Like honestly, it's like we're all like it's like group therapy, and you're our group leader. But because it's I mean the Aviatrix book club is so cool because it's ladies, but they're from all different types of flying backgrounds. And I just like I have no military background, right? And so I only know the military stories that I got from the guys that I flew with. And that's just great, like listening to your stories and reading all the books, and all just soaking it in from all the different perspectives. And it's like group therapy, I think. For me, I think for a lot of us, it's just we look forward to this time together.
Yeah, so yeah, so many things in that. Like I keep talking about the power of story to instruct and inspire, to heal, and to provide a sense of community and belonging. And that's what I'm getting out of this, and I think all of us are getting out of this.
Mhm.
And oh, you said something else. Oh, just about the diversity. That's the fun thing too. Like I kind of, and I think I confessed this in one of my recent social media posts, that I did have like a little um, trepidation about focusing so deeply on aviation only books. Like I might burn
Mhm.
out on this, but the canon is so diverse, our experiences are so diverse, there's always something new to discover. So
Mhm.
it's just always stimulating and fun, and
Yeah.
I'm nowhere close to bored with it
Right.
yet.
Plus, we have novels, and then we have nonfiction, and then we have like
Yeah.
Bev's book, about the history of women in aviation, and there's just so many different buckets that you can dive into. So,
All right. Well, we could sit here and gush about aviation all day. But I want to get back to your story now. Just before we leave these teenage years, there's a little bit in there where I feel like that portion of the book needed a warning. And it would be like, hey,
mhm.
kids, don't try this at home. You were a very interesting risk taker. I was both amused because your storytelling is filled with humor, laughing out loud at some of your antics, and
Mhm.
also cringing like in horror. And it reminded me, I just want to say before I hear your perspective on this, it reminded me of there's one other young adult book out there on the market that is sort of in the same genre that I'm trying to do, and it's Fly Girl by Sid Blue. And I read that book, and that her main character does some crazy shit in that book,
Mhm.
and I'm like, woo, girl, that's a lot, and I'm not sure whether that's what I want my young people reading. But
Yeah.
you've got it in your book. Thankfully, you there's an arc to it. So talk about that stuff.
Yeah. So, I mean, okay. So I always had, like, I always wanted to, like, climb trees and rocks and, like, do all, just get out there. I was always a risk taker, but it was very limited. When I was a kid, I was a little girl. I couldn't get dirty and didn't have a lot of opportunity. And there were no extreme sports or anything like that. So there was just like no way to get that out. And then when I started flying an airplane, and I soloed, there's a total sense of freedom in that you're anonymous because you're up in an airplane. And I think I note in the book back then, the tail numbers in the airplanes were very tiny. On the horizontal stabilizer, like a square inch. They were like, you could hardly even see them when you were standing next to the airplane. And so you could go up in the air, you could do anything, and nobody would know it was you. And so I went through a period in my teenage years that I definitely regret and I feel bad about. But I started, like going up and like buzzing people. Like I would fly out west where there's like golf courses and lakes and like open land. And I would just like start dive bomb people. I really felt bad in hindsight, but it was really fun at the time.
That's the thing. Like I'm laughing and I'm like, oh my God, you're crazy. The pilot me is like, oh my God, what is she doing?
I was a 100-pound girl, and I would like get these big, huge, bulky guys to like run and like take cover. And it was just really fun. I will say though, like I was very hesitant to put that in my book. And I did have people who like read it and said, you look really bad. Like you should just not have this chapter in the book. And I waited, but the truth is I was a dumb teenager and I did dumb things. And, I'm not all goody two shoes. I mean, I am now that I'm a mother, I'm perfect, but
we all are.
Yeah, exactly. but I did do these things as a teenager because it was just such an incredible sense of freedom that I never had. I think that was my act of rebellion. And I will say, I never buzzed children or the elderly, or I don't even.
With the exception of your high school. Course.
Well, yeah, okay, because I knew them. And so, right, that's not children. They were like 17, 18, so it wasn't children, but I did that. And
I feel like I might need to call you Night Witch now.
Yeah. Well,
with some of those stories, you were screaming out of the sky like the Night Witches were at West Point of all places. That's crazy.
Oh my God, that was so much fun. So I live fairly close to West Point. I could get on the airplane, hit the Hudson, go up, and then West Point's like right on the water. And on weekends, they would be out on the fields in these perfect formations. And I would test to see, and I did this several times. I think I just wrote about it once in the book. I would test the waters to see how low I could get before they actually broke ranks and ran. And the answer is pretty low. So, but yeah, I would, know a part in the water.
You were playing chicken with a bunch of Army cadets.
I was, and I
with an aircraft.
Yeah, and then I went back, and nobody ever tracked me. I wasn't on a flight plan. They couldn't see my tail numbers. I would go back. I never got caught. Never came back to haunt me. It's so funny. The one and only time, Will Crick's way, I ever got in trouble. And it was so silly, is at the same airport, but a couple years later, I was a flight instructor, and I was doing teaching my student single engine, emergencies, right? Single engine out emergencies. And so we were cutting the power, or bringing it back to idle, and then I was having him set up for whatever he could set up for, and then we would pull out of it. And somebody actually called the police. The police called the tower, and then when we landed, the police were there because they thought we were, I don't know, they thought we were trying to like buzz people. And the truth is, I was with this student. We never got very low at all. But I got in trouble for that. But, somebody actually figured out where the airplane went back to and like tracked it. So that's it.
The one time that you were actually doing something legit and not,
right.
we would call it flat hatting in the military, and not flat hatting.
I did get in trouble because I explained I'm a flight instructor, and we were practicing, procedures, and we never got below 500 feet. Probably not below. We didn't get below 1,000 over any buildings or people. So in any case, but.
Well, so the thing that you did do in the book, which I was grateful for after that presentation of insanity, was that you did bring it. There was an arc to it. You learned your lessons. You learned from losing other people, and everybody approaches safety and their comfort zone, or how far they'll stretch that comfort zone in their own way. I was somebody who started back here and worked my way toward it. I know a lot of guys who were like hanging it out past the edge, and they learned.
Yeah.
So you learned, and you make that clear in the book.
Yeah, and I did some dangerous things other than buzzing people. I would go up and do loops and barrel rolls and spins and all sorts of crazy stuff in my beat up 152, and got myself into trouble a couple times. But I was a teenager, and I almost flew into the Goodyear blimp one 4th of July, and that was really, really close. They were in the dark until they turned the lights on. I didn't see them in front of me, but yeah. So I definitely started there, and then I learned a few lessons, and I reeled it in.
They're great stories, though. They really make for a great book. So tell us about your path to the airlines via Purdue.
Via Purdue. Gosh, Purdue's amazing. So when I was at Morristown, everybody said you need to go to Purdue to be a pilot. And I know there were other schools like Embry-Riddle and FIT and such. They explained to me, the guys at the airport said, you don't want to go to school in Florida. And the logic was, and I can't argue with this, is that 9 out of 10 aviation accidents happen because of weather. There's no weather down there. So you learn how to fly, and you miss a big part of your education learning how to fly where the weather is always perfect. And Purdue had really bad weather. They have a harsh 4 seasons. And Purdue, I'll just say, is also just an amazing place. Amelia Earhart was actually her last flight. She was flying a Lockheed Electra that was owned by Purdue University Research Center. She actually was flying a Purdue aircraft, doing lab experiments for them with a fully equipped aircraft. And
she was also like a mentor in their engineering department, if I remember correctly.
Yeah,
right?
she was a guidance counselor, and she worked. She was actually on staff when she went missing, and she was on staff at Purdue for in the 30s. And Purdue was really ahead of the whole diversity thing. They had a flight program, and they had women in the flight program. Not that many yet, because it was still fairly new. But they just were really ahead when it came to aviation and when it came to diversity. And I will say more astronauts graduated from Purdue than any other school in the world, including the Air Force Academy. I think there's 27 astronauts graduated from Purdue. That's just a little too late. So in any case, so I wanted to go to Purdue. It was the place to go. They had a very small flight program. There was only like 25 or 30 people in the entire flight program, like for each grade. And I did not get in. It was super, super competitive. And it was, I think they had a requirement that 70% of the students had to be from the state of Indiana. And so I just didn't get in. But I really wanted to go there. My parents clearly thought this was a phase that was going to pass. They didn't want me doing any more flying. My mom thought, as soon as I go to college, I'll meet a boy, and then I'll get married, and I'll forget about all this silly nonsense. And I ended up going to Purdue, and my major was art, because that's what my parents approved of. They were a little baffled why I wanted to go to Purdue for art, but they were like, okay, she wants to go out to the Midwest. She wants something different. So that was fine. So I went out to Purdue. I was an art major. And then I had this whole plan. I clearly did not want to major in art. I love art, but I was not going to major in art to get into the flight program. And so when I got there, the airport is about a mile from the campus. And I just would walk to the airport every day and just meet people and talk to people and make friends. And I met all the students. I particularly attached myself to one professor, Professor Gross. Hi, Larry Gross. He's still my friend to this day. Because he was the one that was like in charge of transfers. He explained to me how you transfer in, but he was very, very solemn and very earnest. And he said, somebody has to drop out of the program in the first semester for you to get in, because you have to be with your class. And so I had my private pilot's license, but I would have to get in second semester freshman year or start all over again as a freshman the next year. So somebody would have to drop out. Any case, long story short, I worked really, really hard. I stalked a lot of people. I got to know a lot of people. I don't think I was probably not the most supremely qualified of all the transfers that they got. They said they had hundreds of people that were applying to transfer in. One guy dropped out who wanted to be a farmer. He wore overalls every day, and I got his seat. But I got it because I was qualified. I was qualified, but I wasn't the most qualified. I got it because I was qualified and because, well, they just wanted me to leave them alone probably at that point. but it was just, you have to do whatever you can do, if you want something. And then when you've done everything you could possibly do, you got to do some more. And
well, I kind of thought that your enthusiasm there too kind of carried the day and helped you get it. Yeah.
They knew that I would make the most of it if I was picked, and they picked me, and I did make the most of it.
It was so great. And then you did, we'll maybe just go really quickly through sort of the way that you got to the airlines, which was doing a bunch of really, I would call them like grunt work in the aviation industry. Give us the list of those things.
So when I graduated, back in the 80s, there were no jobs at the airlines. Like, it was completely shut down. You couldn't even get a flight instructor job. It was really, really hard. And again, this was still before the internet. So you couldn't like job search. You couldn't like take your resume and like send it to 100 people. So it was really hard. You had to build flight hours to eventually get to the airlines. And as far as I knew, the airlines still hadn't hired any women. I think they had at that point, but again, not that I was aware of, or not that anyone that I knew was aware of. So I ultimately made it to a captain at United Airlines, but I can't say that was my goal. For me, I just did everything one step at a time. So I got out, I flight instructed, and I got my double I. And so I, flight instructed instrument, was building time. And, each thing led to the next thing. And I never knew what the next thing was going to be. It was like throwing darts. So I would get enough hours as a flight instructor. And then I got a job working down at the Jersey Shore for a banner towing company. And that was really a lot of fun. And I got a job as a lawn boy, fueling aircraft. And then I met people doing that. Then I got a job as I got more hours, flying freight, flying canceled. Back then, banks had canceled checks and they'd fly them all throughout the night. So I was doing single pilot freight. There's a lot of I know there's a lot of grief right now about single pilot operations, but pilots have been flying single pilot since the beginning of airplanes. Flying single pilot in horrible airplanes. I was based out of Teterboro up and down the Northeast Corridor all night long in the dead of winter. It was terrible, but I was building hours.
Before you continue, the one thing that the concept that I did not understand was the canceled checks.
Yeah.
What does that even mean?
Are you that young? You don't remember?
No, I don't know. I don't understand why they would need to be transported. What does that even mean?
Okay, so oh my gosh, you were making me so old.
I'm not that much younger than you. I know that for a fact, but help me and help the young readers.
So back in the day, you would write a check, and then you would give that check to whoever you're paying. That person would then deposit the check in the bank, and then that check would be canceled by the bank, and then it would be mailed back to the person who wrote the check. So you would have all of your canceled checks, like for your records. And so those checks, that cycle happened throughout the night. And so millions of checks were transported every single night throughout the night.
And it was through its own logistics system. It wasn't through the regular mail.
No, right. It was through the canceled check system.
Okay. I just had to know what that was about. Yeah. Okay, keep going.
That's all I did was I flew canceled checks for a canceled check company. And we flew everything from twin Cessnas up to Lear 35s. So depending on how far your checks were being, it was like UPS or FedEx. You had hubs, like our main hub was at Lunken Field in Cincinnati. Everything went through there. Any case, it was big business. So, but they didn't maintain the airplanes. One pilot, horrible weather conditions. You've worked, 13, 14, 15 hours all night long. So that was one job. I was an aircraft repossessor. So when I got more hours, I could just get on any airplane without any training. That was an airplane that was probably falling apart, and that's why I was being repossessed, because someone didn't have money to maintain it. And I would fly it to wherever the bank paid me to fly it. So I did that for a time period. Um, that was, again, I'm building hours and building hours. I would do anything to build hours. Nowadays, none of these jobs even exist. All the stuff I did was really super dangerous. We got paid absolutely nothing. But you were desperate to build hours. The airlines required thousands and thousands of hours. I think like the average new hire had something like 6,000 hours at the airlines. And there was no pathway. So you got those hours the hard way. It wasn't like you were on a course and you knew, here you have like a plan, like you're on the Aviate program, and from here you go to here, and from here you go to here. Like you never knew what was next. It was just, everything was always up in the air.
Before you go to the next thing, I just wanted to mention that Sandy Parks, our author whose book we read last year, the Under the Radar book, which was set in South Africa, she also has a book with a female aircraft repossessor, or whatever you call it. So she has a couple of fiction novels based around that. Now I want to read them and talk to you about them.
Okay. It's not as exciting as there's a TV show, whatever. And like I've watched it once. It's not that exciting. The bank does supply you with the keys. It's not like you have to like steal them from anybody. And you just kind of sneak into the airport at night. They give you the
which you had experience doing.
Yeah, I did.
You were trained for this.
As a matter of fact, I did that quite a bit at my teenage years. I snuck into airports back when there wasn't as much security. And, like they would tell you where to bring it, and you just, you just got in the airplane, you kind of like figured it out, and you went. So, but it wasn't, you're like by yourself. It wasn't, I never had anybody like running after me with a knife, like trying to get the airplane back from me. They didn't know I was there. So.
Well, when you finally got to the airlines, you had to ride the roller coaster with Pan Am before you could get to your final destination.
Yeah. Well, those are, so the two jobs. So so when I finally had enough hours to get hired by an airline, we got hired by a commuter, which now are called the regionals, but commuters got no respect. We got paid nothing. Like we were eligible for food stamps. A lot of the guys were on food stamps. I think we calculated the number of hours that we worked. We figured out we were making, I think, $1.78 an hour as an airline pilot. And this is after going into debt, like $200,000 in debt for your flight training. And of course, now none of that happens anymore. But that's how competitive it was to build hours to get to the airlines. But my first commuter was Eastern. And I loved it because for the first time ever, we had dispatchers that wrote the flight plan. We had, gate agents. We had de-icers. We had people that actually, took care of the airplane. So it wasn't like, I didn't even have to throw my own bags. Like we had people that loaded up the cargo. So that was really fun. But then Frank Lorenzo came in and, oh goodness, the whole industry kind of got turned upside down by Frank Lorenzo. And, Barbara Walters infamously called him the most hated man in America. And that was probably pretty accurate at the time. In any case, so we went under, and then I was out of work along with thousands and thousands and thousands of more qualified pilots than me on the East Coast. All the Eastern Airline pilots were out. In any case, so then I got hired after that by Pan Am. And I actually got hired by Pan Am World Airways. So Pan Am did have a regional branch, and I flew the ATRs for Pan Am, but they owned it, and it was one seniority list, and you got hired by Pan Am. The interviews and everything was at the Pan Am World headquarters down in Miami, and I could have gone, I went to the ATR, but from there I would have gone right seat in like the 727. But then Pan Am, they had their problems, and then I started interviewing with the majors. And, back then it took like a year to get hired by an airline at your own expense. You had to fly back and forth for all these different phases of the interviews. And I was interviewing with TWA and with United. American wouldn't touch me because my mom's adopted, and they didn't know my genetic pool, and they were required to know your genetic pool. And so I couldn't provide that information. So they wouldn't look at me. Delta wouldn't interview me because Delta at the time, this is what I was told. I know it worked for Delta, but Delta only hired military pilots. And so if you were, if you had a military background, your application would be considered. But if you did not have a military background, you were pretty much just pushed to the side at Delta. So Delta wouldn't take me either. So in any case, TBA, United, and you go back and forth for months. You would fly out there, stay in a hotel for 3 days, and you would go through each phase of the interview. And as you progressed, you would go home and you'd sit by your mailbox for 2 months waiting for the letter to say, we're rejecting you, but they won't tell you why, or we're going to bring you back for the next phase. And this went on it took about a year. It took about a year from beginning to end of flying back and forth and staying in hotels and paying for all that to hopefully get hired. And I got hired by TBA first, and I really wanted to hold out for United. So I was not telling and not responding to TBA, and then they rescinded their offer because I never responded. But I did get hired by United.
I know. So I was so relieved for you when that happened, because I was like, oh girl, that's a big risk.
Yeah, it really was. But I was going for it. I'm like, you know what?
You wanted.
It's what I wanted, and going to go for it. Of course, if I had gone to TBA, I'd be at American now because American acquired them, and then all those TBA pilots became American pilots. But who knew, right?
Right. Well, it sounded like a grueling process, and I never had to go through a process like that. I had plenty of selection processes myself, but I'm going to tell you the one thing that we just talked about earlier. You're not that much older than I am. I was, I would have graduated from high school in 1990. So not just a couple years younger, but
about a decade older.
Okay. A decade, 10 years.
A lot changed in that time. Yeah.
Maybe fine. But there is a detail about this interview process and the things that you went through to just fly on the aircraft in a professional capacity, which was the requirement to wear skirts. So I feel like that at once, on the one hand, it ages us in a way that is absurdly anachronistic from my perspective. I mean, this was not the 1940s. So like when young people hear this story, they're like, oh yeah, those ladies are old, because that had to happen like in the 1940s and 50s, but it didn't. It was happening, like this United application process was in 1989. And I had no sense that the world still had those expectations. So I was kind of shocked and infuriated at the absurdity of it.
I know. Yeah. And the truth is, it even seemed barbaric to me at the time. But, back then the airlines were run by like good old boys that were from a different era, and they expected their women to be in dresses. And the airlines, that was their expectation. So I didn't fly. Like when I went to United and I got a uniform, I had pants. But the whole interview process, I had to wear a skirt for that. I couldn't wear pants for that because
in the simulator with the yoke, like hiking it up to your crotch. I'm just like,
no, and I'm really sure you're one of those little mini ferries too. So I would bring my seat all the way up and then try, the yoke. The yoke goes in between your legs, right? And like TBA, my interview, the sim ride portion of it was in a 707. And for me to rotate that aircraft, I had to bring the yoke all the way back with my seat all the way forward, and do that in a pencil skirt, and it was pretty awkward.
I think a pleated skirt would have been better suited for that.
I didn't know that I was going to encounter that until I was in that situation, and I tell you though, honestly, it's so funny, Liz, because the guy that was giving me the check ride, it was this older gentleman with gray hair and this clipboard. And I don't think he'd ever had this problem before. And he was turning red. Like he was so uncomfortable with me holding my crotch while trying to fly the airplane, because every time I yanked back, my skirt would go all the way up. And he like kept pretending like he had to write notes over here. I mean, it was funny. it
Well,
was,
better that guy than what the
yeah,
Herbs of the world.
yeah, yeah. If they ever make a movie of this would be the funniest scene ever because he was
Yeah,
just, he didn't know what to
like
do with himself.
hey, that's so crazy. I was issued a skirt when I joined the Coast Guard in 1991. I never ever wore a skirt in the military, with the exception of my full dress uniform for formal events. But wow, I just couldn't believe that that was a requirement, and you made it through. That's great. So
Yeah.
about these Herbs
Oh,
and Dicks, which are the names that you use to describe individuals in your story, but also as a an avatar for a certain type of guy, and the Dicks were the people who didn't want you there for whatever reasons. This guy had a very personal reason, and then the Herbs, who were the guys that were kind of excited that you were there for all the wrong reasons.
they're like, ooh, I like this. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Lock her
Yeah.
and lock it with me, vacuum sealed in for 14 hours. That works for me. Yeah. That was definitely, they were worse.
Yeah, and I was appalled actually at like how far this guy went. And we read some of this in Becky Condon's book, She Flies, her experiences of this. So I'm assuming that you two are not the only ones. But I was like, hey, when this guy like sidled up to you and pinned you in the cockpit behind you, I wanted to scream at you and say, hey, we have elbows for a reason. Fling that thing. Like, do something. Yeah. But you admit that you like felt paralyzed. Talk about that.
So it's really interesting, Liz, because I do talk about this in the book. So there were guys that were far beyond appropriate. Like I was molested in the cockpit. I was, I mean, the situation you're talking about was I had one captain who was touching me while I was flying the airplane, and like not just touching me, but like touching me, like he was actually molesting me while I was flying the airplane. And when we landed, I tried to get up and get out of the cockpit because, of course, you can't do anything. And as soon as I opened the door, the flight attendant was standing right in the doorway saying goodbye to the passengers. And so I couldn't go anywhere. So I was standing behind her saying goodbye to the passengers. And this captain comes up behind me in a manly state, and he starts giving it to me in my behind, like right in front of the passengers standing behind me. And I couldn't go anywhere. And I have to say, I was just so, like you think if someone were to sit you down in a classroom and say, if this happened, what would you do? You'd have a great answer. Oh, I would do this, I would do that. But then when it actually happens to you, it's just so shocking and so like unexpected. And I couldn't go backwards. I couldn't go forwards. I couldn't really push the flight attendant out of my way because literally the passengers were right there in front of her. I didn't know what to do. And
this was like just the start of things. I mean,
this was just the start of things.
Molesting you in the back of the crew van, coming to your hotel room, and then thankfully this clown was discovered eventually.
I was not special. He had been doing it to quite a number of pilots, and it was the guys. And I will say this, Herb was the exception. Most of the guys that we flew with were absolute gentlemen, professionals, big brothers to us, fathers to us when we were young. Just really, really good guys. Almost all of them are really good guys. But there were exceptions. And when Herb was doing this, he started telling all these sexually explicit stories about his first officers. Word got around. And then there were some pilots that were offended by this and wanted to get to the bottom of like all these young girls are sleeping with this one captain, really? And
who doesn't sound like he was a catch exactly.
Yeah, no. Oh gosh, no. So any case, it was the men who kind of like spoke up and went and talked to the chief pilot, and then they started doing an investigation, and it turned into a really big deal that lasted a number of years because it ends up quite a few women had been affected, and it went to the EEOC, and then this captain got a bunch of time off, and in the end, they blamed the women, though. In the end, they blamed us, and we we were given NDAs to sign to say that we weren't allowed to ever tell anybody that we had been, sexually, assaulted uh, on United grounds. And
That was absolutely appalling, and you didn't sign it. Were there any repercussions?
no, there really weren't.
They couldn't do anything.
They couldn't do anything. They thought that we would, and I had been very amiable up until that point. But when I got that document, I was like, all right, I've been really nice and cooperative, and no. And it wasn't just me. I talked to the other women, and one of them had a husband who was very involved in all of this. And we had an attorney that the union had appointed. In any case, I had advice too. It wasn't like I was smart enough to just, as a group, everyone got together and said, we're not going to sign this. But I didn't want to really speak for anybody else in the book. But yeah.
Yeah. So I know you say, oh, well, this thing would never happen now. They would never get away with it. Well, okay. But if a young woman found herself in that situation, do you have any advice for her based on your experience about how to handle that in the moment?
Yeah. The reason why I think it wouldn't happen now, Liz, is because I think a pilot knows they'd be arrested, and they would be. The stuff that he did, he would be in prison for. And the other thing is, I think that women, there's so much more education and awareness that women have. I had very little awareness. I had when this was happening to me, I truly, truly believed it was just me. This couldn't possibly be happening to anyone else. If I say anything, I'm going to have a scarlet letter on me. No one's going to want to fly with me. And really none of that was true. And I didn't know it. But I think women today know that they are not alone. They are educated. They're aware that this is inappropriate, and they're given a lot of resources to deal with that sort of thing. I think if someone came to me and they were experiencing this or anything like this, I think my advice is, when you're a female pilot, I would get involved in different support groups that are out there now that were not available when I was younger. Anything from the 99s, ISA 21, WAI. There's just so many different organizations that have all sorts of resources, information, other women you can talk to, other people that have, whatever you've experienced, there's other people that have experienced it. And find that support group, because there are people that will help you. You are not alone. And I think women need to understand that, but I think for the most part they do. But that would be my advice, is don't be in this industry alone like I was. Be a part of different groups, and there'll be plenty of people there to help you.
Absolutely. Take advantage of the community that we have now that we didn't have when we were all isolated in our relative.
Exactly right. Yeah.
Cockpits. Yeah. That's great. So you had a little setback. Your career was rolling along, and you had a captain who was generously rubbing your neck in the most platonic way.
He was a good guy. Yeah.
And he looked at your neck and he was like, girl, you're kind of messed up here. Go see a chiropractor. And you discovered what?
Yeah. So I was exactly right. I was flying on an international trip, and we had taken the Pan Am routes. And with the routes, we got their pilots and the equipment. And so these Pan Am pilots were really very just wonderful, jovial, friendly guys. And this one captain's name was Roy, would rub the flight attendant's shoulders when they came in, and all that. And so one day, and he was doing it generally just platonically, just to be nice. And one day we're flying, and I would get these mean headaches, and I had a lot of pains down my arms and all that stuff. And I didn't really think much about it. I just figured it was my terrible, horrific lifestyle. But one day a flight attendant came in, and then he rubbed her shoulders and she left. And I'm like, hey, Roy, not for nothing there, but my neck hurts too. You never offered to give me a shoulder rub. So I was like, darling, turn around here. Let me rub your shoulders. Well, in any case, at the time, per our FOM, our hair couldn't touch our collar. So I was wearing my hair up, and you could see the back of my neck. And I actually had, which I didn't know until he pointed it out, I had big bones sticking out of the back of my neck, which he looked at it, and I have a really skinny neck apparently too. And I was younger. And he started telling me all my medical symptoms. He goes, I bet you get pain down your arms. I bet you get headaches. And I'm like, yeah, like, how do you know all that? And it ends up he had a daughter who had neck problems. And so he knew a little bit about like chiropractors and all that stuff. So he said, your neck's out of alignment, like really out of alignment. Go see a chiropractor. And I was actually leaving right when I got back from this trip on a really long cross-country motorcycle trip. And where I wear a heavy helmet and, and I thought, wow, if I can go to a chiropractor, maybe that's all there is to it. Maybe I need to get an adjustment. I'd never been to a chiropractor, and that was still a fairly new concept back then. So the chiropractor discovered, it's really, really, I could write a whole book about it. So I won't go into too many details, but he took x-rays and discovered that my skull was actually not attached to my vertebrae. The cervical 1 to cervical 2, the atlas to the axis, had been completely shattered, and that my head was attached by nothing but soft tissue. There was no bone between my skull and my spine. So years later, I'm back in the cockpit now. It completely took me out of the cockpit, took me out of life. I had multiple neurosurgeries. I have 8 pieces of 22 gauge stainless steel wire in there. I have 3 bone grafts. Tremendous block of my life I lost.
How many years?
It was the doctors wanted me out for a couple of years, but I stayed out quite a bit less than that because I had no pay, I had no benefits, I had no sick leave. I had nothing, and I was desperately poor, and I had a lot of medical bills that my insurance didn't cover. So I think I always had neck problems after that because I went back sooner than I should have as far as healing goes. But I was in physical therapy for like a year. And when I finally had to fight to get my medical back. In any case, there's so much to it. Honestly, it's like an entire book because it was very, very complicated. Everything that went wrong. But I eventually got my medical back. But I will say the one lesson I learned, Liz, was, the expression, without your health, you have nothing. I always thought I knew what that meant. I always thought it meant, well, without your health, what good is all the riches in the world if you don't have your health to enjoy it? And that's actually not what it means. What it means is without your health, you have nothing. You have no job. You have no friends. You can't go to your cousin's wedding. You can't go to the movies. You can't get out of bed. You literally have nothing, literally nothing. I couldn't just get up and walk to the kitchen to make myself a sandwich because I was paralyzed for a period. I couldn't brush my own teeth. Somebody had to completely take care of me. I had nothing. And who you are the choices that you make. Like, you choose to be a pilot. You choose to wear blue. You choose to wear a daisy necklace, whatever. You have nothing. You could be a cucumber. You have nothing. And I figured out that's what that means.
Wow. I can't believe that you went through that. And I'm so happy for you that you got through it and got to continue your career for a period of time anyway, until you had a follow-on injury. But I'm just in awe that you powered through that and then got back on the horse,
I did. And I had many a doctor tell me, you'll never fly again. You'll be lucky if you walk again. Like, what's wrong with you? They just didn't believe me. Whatever. Lots of doubters. But I did make a full recovery, and they actually did a whole case study on me, the medical community in Manhattan, because it was so unusual.
I'm just going to put this out there. I hope that you decide to write the book or something about it, because it sounds like a very inspiring story, and a story that I have friends who were knocked down for different reasons too. Mm-hmm. And there's some camaraderie, there's some commiseration and healing in reading somebody else's success story by going through that. So anyway, I'm just going to put that on you.
I'm very lucky. I count my blessings every day. I'm the luckiest person I know.
Wow. Well, back to the fun and entertaining stuff. You got to these big aircraft, and it sounds like you didn't ever encounter it before then, but you discovered this fun little world of, I don't know if it was like practical joking or how we would talk about it, but the fun little surprises that you would find on pre-flight in your aircraft.
Yeah, it was really interesting because right. So when I moved up to the 737 as a first officer, it ends up that this fleet, and different fleets were different. This fleet was decorated quite heavily with pornography, and it was
I
not.
love that. Decorated quite heavily with pornography. That's quotable.
And it wasn't anything that you could see like walking in, but if you look, if you open up any, anything that you could unscrew, uncap, oxygen mask, smoke goggles, anything that had like a hidden side to it, there was really hardcore pornography in there. And I had, again, never seen pornography in my life. This was back in the 90s. It was back before, I don't know, I can't remember really had the internet yet, but I had never seen I'd never seen a Playboy or Playgirl, whatever, anything. So when I first came across this, it was shocking because I'd never seen other like naked women either. I'm like, what is going on here? Because it was all, it was really, really, it wasn't soft porn. It was hard porn. And some of it was really disgusting. Any case. Yes. So that was interesting. But once I got over my initial shock, I kind of felt a little bit, it's really hard to say this without coming off as being just wrong, but I was a little bit proud to be there because I really realized how clearly that there were no women in front of me, that I was like the only woman there, and that nobody expected me to be there because it wouldn't be like this if it was an environment that had other women. And I knew that when the flight attendants would walk in, they would hide the pornography, but they didn't hide it from me because I was one of them, and as backwards as that sounds today, and as much as I hated the pornography, to me, I think that was the first time that I really, really, truly felt like an insider, because that was a big secret that nobody knew except the pilots that flew that airplane. And I came from another fleet and didn't even know about this. And I was a pilot at the company. And so, yeah, it was kind of like, well, I guess I've made it.
Oh my God. So it's such an interesting perspective to hear it from you. Now, we've encountered this in several of our books and encountered some very humorous ways in which our women have dealt with
I
it.
had fun getting rid of it. Yeah.
Yeah, well, you got rid of it and you replaced it with, it sounds like some very tame, underwear models in your case. So last month we talked about Mandy Hickson's book, An Officer Not a Gentleman. And at the beginning of the month, we had a great conversation that really went down this road. I am shocked how high the percentages of women who encountered this.
Mm-hmm.
But honestly, like most of the time when they talk about it, they present it in a way that implies that it is being done to them to harass them.
No.
But the perspective that
you weren't there.
Yeah, the perspective you give is that this was a joke, an inside joke amongst the guys. And
absolutely.
they just happened to show up and were being let in on it. And then, but like, I left that conversation. It was a great, we were like almost crying, laughing, talking about it. And then we kind of shifted to more serious conversation about how messed up it was for a woman to encounter something like this on a pre-flight, on a check ride, and how far it threw some of them off their game, and it just kind of like you being molested in the cockpit when you're trying to land a plane, like how unbelievably unsafe and inappropriate and unprofessional that was. But literally, like your perspective is the first time that I've heard of like, this wasn't aimed at us. This wasn't like intended for us. It was something that they did, and
it wasn't intended for us to see or to know about. It absolutely, we were not the target audience. And this is something that way predated, the whole point, it was it predated women ever being in the cockpit.
Right.
And, the mechanics were in on it, the pilots were in on it. There were no female mechanics, there were no female pilots. And then when we came in, it kind of like put a damper on their inside boy frat house, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, you kind of ruined their party a little bit,
Yeah.
didn't you?
mm,
Yeah. Sorry,
Yeah. It was
guys.
so sad. It was so
Boys
sad.
can be weird.
Yeah. But I did replace anything I found. I would put, underwear ads and nothing, nothing really dirty, but enough that they would open it and be like, wait, what?
Well, some of our women went there. They went and got the raunchiest male on male fun that they could find.
I
replaced it all.
you need to actually go and buy like a magazine in person at a store to do that. I was not up to that task at all.
Our good little Catholic girl. No,
but it was funny. It actually, I mean, I never took anything personally. I mean, well, maybe being molested, but I mean, like for the most part, it was a man's world. It was a frat house. We weren't supposed to be there, when all this started. Women were not a part of it. And I think, look, just go back to like World War I, World War II. They all had the guys had all the pinups and all that stuff. I mean, that's just sort of like a male culture. I'm not saying it was, good or bad. What I'm saying is that it was 100% male. It was not intended for the women.
Yeah,
it wasn't for us at all. So,
I'm glad that you brought it to light that way, because I really was. I left that conversation again, having cried laughing about the ways in which the women dealt with it, but also like, hey guys, you're really messed up if this is what you were doing to intimidate and harass the women. But thank you. You gave me a new perspective on it. So very interesting.
It definitely predated us coming, that's for sure. It was an old tradition.
Silly fellas. So you talked at the beginning of our conversation when you were talking about why you wrote this book, a little bit about 9/11 and how it kind of was the starting point for you, just trying to express your feelings. And you talk about, you have a chapter on 9/11 in the book. And what I think is really interesting, I feel like 9/11, September 11th, 2001 is a shared experience for everyone in the world who was alive then. And then there are subcultures that were affected by it differently. Obviously, the victims' families is one group of people, the first responders in the various places where these things took place. And then we have within aviation, air traffic controllers and dispatchers and pilots and air crews. And then obviously the military members who had to go off to war. So everybody has like these varied perspectives on it, but it's this inflection point that we can all tie to, like, what were you doing? Where were you? It's talked about in Mandy Hickson's book that I just mentioned. She talks about this crazy experience of traveling back from training in the United States to the UK. And there is a U.S. aircraft carrier basically threatening to shoot down an unwitting civilian aircraft. And her jet was able to intervene and be like, hey, we'll help you out here so you don't have to shoot down that poor plane that doesn't even know you're there or what's going on. And then Robin Carden's new book, I don't know if you know this, I had a sneak peek at it. It's the third in her trilogy, the Fly Girl series. The last book, Flying Home, goes heavily into 9/11, obviously in a fiction setting, but she really like brings that experience out in the book. Talk about that, and what I was missing there, knowing what I know about how it really affected a lot of pilots' careers. What I was missing in your telling is, afterwards, like, did it affect your career in any way, and in what way and how long?
Well, I mean, it affected the whole industry, obviously, because we went into bankruptcy and we lost our contract and pilots took up to 60% pay cuts. So, I mean, it was devastating in everyone's life, right? But then there was, it's actually interesting because I'm thinking my next book, I might make it about exactly this topic. So pilots were deeply affected by this. We, for one thing, there were thousands and thousands and thousands of pilots in the air on 9/11. And nobody sugarcoated. Our dispatchers at United and all the major airlines told the pilots planes are being hijacked, their friends are dead, twin towers are falling, get your airplane on the ground. And pilots were told to prepare to be hijacked. And I wasn't in the air, I was on the ground, but I've flown with many pilots subsequent to 9/11 who said, I took out my knife because pilots were required to carry Leatherman tools with blades on them. We took out the crash axe. I was flying with the crash axe in my lap, and the first officer had the chemical fire extinguisher in his lap. They prepared to be hijacked, and they had to get the airplanes down. We had one aircraft, and I think there are a lot of stories like this. This is one example. We had a 777 coming in from Tokyo, coming in to land at San Fran, and they were not permitted to land because everything shut down. So then they divert. Now, they don't have a whole lot of extra fuel if you're coming, a transoceanic crossing like that. They diverted to go to Anchorage. Anchorage wouldn't let them land. Then they tried landing at a military installation up there, and they said, if you try to land, we're going to shoot you down. They declared an emergency, and they still couldn't get a clearance to land. And they had hundreds of passengers. That plane landed ultimately with 5,000 pounds of fuel. The 777 holds, like 178,000 pounds of fuel. They were below the unusable fuel line.
Oh my gosh.
Manual, because nobody will let them put their damn airplane on the ground because of 9/11. And pilots were really traumatized on that day. They had to get their airplanes on the ground, and nobody would let them land. And there's no, you hear a lot about the post-trauma with first responders and all that, which is completely legit and deserves the attention that they've gotten. But for some reason, the fact that the pilots were in the air and they knew what was happening and they had to land their airplanes under these circumstances, that's never, like, I haven't seen one movie, documentary, newspaper article.
I wish I could recall the name of the musical with Beverly Bass.
Yeah.
That touches on it.
Oh wait, I know this. From Far Away.
From Far Away, yeah. That's the only thing I've ever seen like that.
But it doesn't, and that's a fantastic musical. And but that musical focuses on the people in Gander and the socializing that took place on the ground.
You're right. Yeah.
It barely touches on. It barely touches at all on the fact that there were dozens of pilots that diverted to Gander to begin with. It was really about the social impact on the ground and how everybody came together.
No, you're right. That's fair.
It's not From Far Away. Yeah. And it's an amazing musical. And
I think you need to write the book.
But the big missing puzzle piece is what happened. How did those pilots get their airplanes on the ground? Yeah. And the dispatchers too. So our dispatchers, who are our company dispatchers, were the ones that were communicating with the pilots, informing them. The air traffic controllers did not know what was going on. They were on the receiving end of planes landing, but they were not in the loop. The airlines had their company fleets land before the FAA got around to that. So, but we have a whole crisis center that went into full-blown action, and I've talked to some of those dispatchers, and they were traumatized. One guy the guy who was actually talking, so United 93, which was the aircraft that went into Shanksville. So those pilots knew that planes were being hijacked and had armed themselves and had prepared to be hijacked. And the dispatcher they were talking to, I don't think he ever worked again after that day, because he always felt a sense of just responsibility, because
survival guilt.
He was the one talking to them, and they didn't get down quick enough, and they got hijacked. But they got hijacked subsequent to having this discussion, prepare yourself to be hijacked. Yeah. So, and they fought really violently, those pilots, and they never got credit for that. They fought hard against those hijackers. Some of it was recorded, and they couldn't overcome what what these terrorists did to them. But in any case, okay, I'm gonna get emotional. So
Well, I hope that you write that story. I think it's like you said, a story that needs to be told, and it has been
yeah, it's not
overlooked.
my story. It would be right to talk about what these pilots went
Right.
through.
No, exactly. Yeah, it would be a lot of research, I'm sure, but and hard. But I hope you do.
Yeah, I'll see.
Well, just a couple more things. So,
Mhm.
you spent a chapter talking about motherhood
Mhm.
and how becoming a mother sort of influenced your relationship with aviation. And this is a conversation I've had many times with many different perspectives and experiences. I have my own, which is very different
Mhm.
from all of yours, or the one, this sort of common theme among you, where you, when you became a mother, it sort of changed your attitude about aviation. I was already a mother when I became a
Mhm.
pilot. So, and I just kept trucking along and having more babies while I was flying. And actually, it got easier for me as a pilot because with my first one, I was deployed at sea for 6 to 8 weeks at a time. And as a pilot in my world, my
Yeah.
deployments were much shorter. So,
Yeah.
and I also had like some relationship dynamics that from my first marriage to this marriage, I knew I had very wonderful, loving support at home from a man who was able and willing to do absolutely everything
Mhm.
on his own. So, different perspective. But
Mhm.
I admired that you talked about it, about the guilt that you felt, sort of
Mhm.
the support network that you had to build, and then how you brought that for full circle at the end to say that it was, that it, even though it was hard, it was worth it. So, tell
Yeah.
us about that.
Yeah. So being a pilot, so there right now there is like an attrition rate where uh, we get a lot of women start in aviation and then they ultimately quit, and men who start in aviation don't quit. And the $1 million question is why? What is going on here? And I know a lot of people, the answer is, well, the men are to blame because they don't treat the women right. I personally don't think that's the reason. I think that might be the reason in some cases. Not saying that's not ever the reason, but I think that women are recruited to become pilots, which is very important. We need to get out there and expose them and recruit them and do whatever we can to encourage them. But I think that what happens is all of those tactics focus on that woman when you're 25 years old, what it's going to be like to be an airline pilot and how awesome it's going to be. And it is. You're young, you're single, you're flying around the world, you're making lots of money, and it's an amazing life. And that that's the recruiting doesn't, the expectations don't go past that. And I think that women, their lives are very different as they go through different stages in life. Where men, I don't think their lives change quite so dramatically. And uh, being a pilot isn't just a job, it's a lifestyle. And it's a completely different life when you're 25 and single versus when you're, say, 35 and pregnant and 40 and pregnant with a baby at home. And maybe, you're divorced at this point, or you have a husband who isn't, on board with taking care of young children. They could be the greatest guy in the world, but maybe that's not in their skill set. Maybe they didn't sign up for that, or they don't want that, or they have their own career. And so, um, for me, I loved, loved, loved flying. It was amazing. Then I got married and it wasn't quite as amazing. And then I got pregnant and then it became very difficult. I still love the flying, I still love the job, but the lifestyle, oof, that was hard because I was pregnant and I was sick. And then I had a child, and then I was pregnant again. I had another child. And it was just really, really hard. And it was very difficult. And I felt a tremendous amount of guilt. And I didn't have a support system at home where I felt like it's okay, I can leave because my kids are just as happy and taken care of. I didn't have that. I had to find that. And some women inherently have a husband who provides that, and they are free, like guilt free, to go, and they know that their child is not only being taken care of, but their child's being loved. You have to know that. You have to feel it. When you leave, someone else is going to make sure that they have a good Halloween because you're not going to be there for Halloween, to make sure they have a costume and they get candy and they make it to the class party and all that stuff.
And I was fortunate in that way, for sure.
Right. And a lot of women are. A lot of women are. But if you don't have that, it doesn't mean you have to quit, which a lot of women do quit. It means you have to find it. You have to make it. Right. And for me, like I found a wonderful nanny who was more like a grandma. She's still like very, very close to our family. She loved my babies. I loved her. They loved her. And ultimately I had that. But I had to find that. I had to make that happen. And you can. You don't have to just quit. But I think um I think in the end, so the point was, I did go through a very difficult period in my career where it was very, very hard to go to work. I loved when I got there, I loved being at work. I still loved flying. I didn't like missing, leaving my children behind. But you know what? Kids grow up, they get older, they're flexible. What for you is traumatizing, for them, it's completely normal and they're perfectly happy as can be. And I think in the end, it was more difficult for me than it ever was for my kids. They are both adults now. They're both in college. They're both doing fantastic. They're amazing. They're wonderful, loving, mature, healthy men. They're going to contribute to society and be good husbands and good fathers. And I stuck with my career. And in the end, you do get through this phase. You do figure it out. It's just one more challenge. It's one more roadblock that women have to overcome that men don't have to overcome. But you will figure it out and you will get through it. And in the end, I couldn't imagine if I had ended up walking away from my career because of that. I think I would have always regretted it. I would have. And your perspective does change as you get through these hardships. You can reflect back on them. And
yeah, I wouldn't go so far as to just make a broad sweeping generalization that all men don't go through it. There are some I know who have ended up being in a position where they're single parents and are having to struggle with these things too. And to be fair to those men, these kinds of conversations sometimes leave them out or exclude them in a way that we don't like being excluded. And so I just wanted to recognize that. But I really respect, the way that you presented that, and that, there are a couple of aspects of modeling joy for your children and how are you going to do that? I know I wouldn't have been able to model any joy if I had given up my career. And also just them seeing somebody working toward their goals and dreams will hopefully inspire them to do the same thing. But I felt the same guilt with my first child that you express in the book, and he's a grown man now and he is in the Coast Guard. So for the very reason that I had to leave him alone as an infant and a toddler, is the thing that he chose to go do as an adult.
So obviously he was okay
resilient.
with it, right?
Yeah,
right. And how many, I know, I tell you, I have quite a number of female pilot friends whose adult children now became pilots. So clearly they were totally okay with mom being a pilot because they wanted the exact same lifestyle. So so I think it is something that we have to come to terms with ourselves and understand, that we're suffering more than the kids are. And that's okay. You just have to find your peace. You have to find your peace at home, and it all comes around. It all comes around.
Yeah. Time with your children. You know what? I got the experience of time with my child during COVID.
Yeah.
And it did not help our relationship. I will just put it that way. So we are much better when we have very small, condensed quality time together rather than long and excruciating just time getting on each other's nerves. So I'll just leave it at that. So what are you doing now? I read your afterward, and I just want to say, back on this motherhood topic really quickly, that there were two times when I always pay attention to this in books when I tear up, like what makes me cry. And I say this so many times in my interviews, but my roommate in my grad school program, my writing program, she did her thesis on at what point does a reader cry, and it is generally when a character gets what they need. And so the two times were when we were talking about motherhood and you were in the air on Christmas night or Christmas Eve, and you heard that there were children in the back who were upset because they didn't think that they were going to get to see Santa because, he would have gone to their house and if they weren't sleeping in their bed, all this stuff. And then you pointed out Santa's sleigh Out the
It was
window.
it was such a good time. Yeah, so I was flying Christmas Eve. I was a little depressed myself because I wasn't home and it was Christmas Eve. And the flight attendant came up and said, "We've got a bunch of kids in the back that are crying because they're not home. It's Christmas Eve and they think Skin is going to skip their house because they're not home in bed." And I was like sad because I wanted to be with my kids, and I just really was. It made me sad that these kids were back there. I guess the cheap tickets must be late at night on Christmas Eve, right? So
Hmm.
we had a lot of families on that flight. And then we were at altitude. The controller called passing traffic that was passing, right off our left wing. And boy, they had the brightest rotating beacon, red beacon. And I'm like, darn, if that doesn't look like Rudolph flying past us. So the great thing about being a captain is you can do whatever you want, right? So I made a PA to the whole cabin that Rudolph is flying past us, and I was talking to Santa. I had him on the radio, and that he was explaining that we were, I think, over Denver, and that he had a bunch of house rooftops to stop at, and he wasn't going to get to our destination for hours at long after we're going to be on the ground and you're all going to be home in your beds. And I just did this whole big PA, and it was so fun because you could almost like feel the CG shift a little. Everybody like ran to the left side of the airplane, and all the passengers let the kids all take the left side, and they all switched seats, and it was just this big Christmas Eve celebration. The whole airplane got into it, and when we got, the flight attendants were like, kept calling me, oh my God, it's like we're having a big Christmas party back here. And when we got on the ground, there were actually moms that came up to me that were crying. They were like so happy that it turned out what they thought was going to be the worst Christmas of their Christmas Eve of their children's lives turned out to be the most memorable experience ever. And I had one little girl actually hug me, and she whispered in my ear so no one else could hear it that she loved Rudolph and she saw
Oh.
him. And she really believed that she saw Rudolph fly by. So I was, I'm like, I can't be with my kids, but I'm going to do whatever I can to, to bring some joy to other families. And I found over and over again, I got a chance to do things like that. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, it made me tear up. It was adorable, and the reason I brought it up now is because I was about to say the other time was really like at the last line of the book, where and people will have to read it, but it's just like go after your dreams.
Mhm.
And so I read that you are doing inspirational speaking, motivational speaking, and stuff like that. So what are you doing now?
Yeah, it's really interesting, Liz, because like I'm the exact same person as I always was before I wrote a book. But then when you write a book, suddenly people find you. And now suddenly like you have like something to say, which is really no different than I would have said before. But so I've been really fortunate in that I've been invited to speak at lots of different organizations, everything from Rotary Club to the Smithsonian. I've done graduation speech and the kickoff speech and all that. They have the Smithsonian has a girls aviation STEM camp and in the summers, and I've gone into there a number of times, and I've spoken to everything from Girl Scout troops to conferences. I mean, just gosh, uh, I figured out that my purpose now. So I had a really long career, right? And I was a mother. I mean, again, phases of life, and a lot of this is behind me now. I'm not flying any longer, and I realized that the aviation industry really needs to diversify. And we really, and I love boys. I have two sons. Boys are great. I love them. They're wonderful. But, we really have to encourage the next generation of young women. And, half the talent in this country is female. And we're missing out. In the industry, we need more talent. We need more pilots. There's a lot of jobs opening up, a lot more jobs going to be opening up, over the next number of years. And so I figured out that I now have a platform where I can get out there and do whatever I can to pass the torch. My career is behind me as a professional airline pilot. And that's a little sad and a little depressing. But at the same time, I'm like, that kind of puts me into a cool position now, because now I can contribute to keep this going, to keep it moving forward. And that's what I'm doing. That's what I'm trying to do. So whoever, and I don't charge anything. I probably should, but people have tried to pay me. I'm like, no, like donate that to some, like to WAI or something. I don't need money. I just really want to get out here and try to, go to these different events and try to see it to be it. And who knows, if I influence 1, 2, 3 girls to maybe see something in themselves that they didn't see in themselves before, then, my life is good. So
That's awesome.
that's what I'm trying
Speaking
to do.
of WAI,
Mhm.
you're going to be there in Long Beach in February, right?
Yes, I am. I'm looking forward to it. Super
Yeah,
excited.
so yeah, we're going to do a special event with an author reading and social hour at the beginning on opening night. So I
Mhm.
hope people will join us for that. And then you'll be at the tables. It'll be on the schedule for you, for everyone to get a signed copy of Jet Boss, which I was there with you last year and you killed it. And I can't wait to see you go even
Wow.
farther with the book this year. Um, Laura, was there anything else you wanted to talk about before we transition to talking about writing?
Um, no, the only thing I would just like to put out like a piece of advice, if that's doesn't sound
Bring it.
the one thing that this is totally me, and so like take it or leave it, my perspective. I see over and over again young people or anybody, they're being told to like have these grandiose goals. Like when you are in the third grade, like you should be an astronaut. And that works for a lot of people, right? But I think that this is just what I've picked up on. I think that thinking that you need to have some goal that's so far off on the horizon that it's not a part of your life, it's not a part of who you are yet, it's not in any way something that's like a daily accomplishment for you, I think that can be overwhelming and even self-defeating. For me, I found that if you just keep moving forward one step at a time, if you just do what gives you joy and then see where that leads you, and then where, like, you have to be flexible, because you could think, I want to be something very specific. And if it doesn't work out, then you think, oh, I failed. No, you didn't fail. It's just time for you to take a different bend in the road. So I guess my departing words are just keep moving forward. And every time you accomplish something and you're like, oh, wow, look at that. I actually got here. I didn't think I was going to get this far. Then see where that leads, see what doors that opens up, and then just keep moving forward in that vein. You don't have to have some long-term goal way off on the horizon that you can't even relate to yet, because it's such a grand goal. And who knows, you'll end up someplace like a captain at United Airlines flying wide bodies when that wasn't even anything that was like on your radar at all.
I love all of that. I love all of that. I had that experience in my life too.
Mhm.
Just moving forward,
Mhm.
um, gathering tools and skills
Mhm.
and experiences along the way, and then being presented with opportunities I never would have dreamed
Right,
of.
exactly.
I
Right.
never. I mean, if you look at my career starting off as a deckhand on a ship scraping barnacles off of buoys, never in a million years did I imagine having a master in public administration and being a foreign diplomat. I did dream of being a pilot and I did that, but then all of
Mhm.
these other opportunities opened up as well. So I am totally on board with that.
Right. And so exactly. And always be open-minded to stuff that was not, that you didn't anticipate, and that, well, that's not on my checklist of what I'm going to be achieving. So, and I think a lot of pressure is put on young people to set off like these massive long-term goals, and I just think, like I said, that can be cause more problems than encouragement.
Well, yeah. So maybe there's something in between, because so I do think that you should have some direction that you like, some waypoint in the future that you're moving toward, and then also be be flexible to the
Yeah.
curves that life brings you. Yeah. No, I love that. Yep.
Yeah.
I
And
totally.
for some people that does work, having long-term goals. Like I want to be an astronaut, and they become an
Yeah.
astronaut. So
I had that goal. I wanted to be an astronaut, and then I realized you had to be a pilot first. Maybe if you have that goal way out there, look at the little steps that are along the way, and maybe shoot for the first one. Just like you're saying, just one little step at a time.
Yeah.
I love that.
See where it goes.
Laura, this has been awesome. So much fun. We talked forever. I may end up splitting this interview into 2 parts and then doing the book portion, but I just want to thank you. I want to thank you for your support of the Aviatrix Writers Group, because you've been a great mentor and supporter of that group. And I love watching you guys support and network each other and cross-promote each other's work. I appreciate your participation in the book club. It's your experience enriches the conversations. So grateful that you wrote this book. So grateful for your time here. Remind us before we go where we can find you.
Where you can find me. Okay, so the best way to find me and to find my book is if you just go to my website, which is just my name, 747. So it's Laura Savino 747 @well.com. And on there you have my email. There's a link right there to Amazon that brings you to my book. I just did an Audible, so you can listen to it or you can purchase it.
I did both. I'd read the book and then I just finished listening to the Audible. You did a great job.
Thank you.
Yes.
I haven't even listened to my own Audible yet, so
it was great. You did great.
But so on there, and also I've got on my website, I've got on the last tab that you can fly, I've got links to scholarships, all different programs, organizations for people that want to get into aviation and they don't know where to begin. They don't know what resources there are. I put it all together. I think I have like $6.2 million in links to different scholarships on that last tab. So it's all put together in that page. So go there if you know someone or that has questions or is thinking about learning to fly and they don't know where to begin.
All great stuff. Thank you so much, Laura.
You're welcome. Thank you so much, Liz.
Thanks so much for listening. If you plan to attend the Women in Aviation International Conference in Long Beach, California in March, please join us on opening night, February 23rd at 7:30 p.m. for an exclusive author event where you can hear readings and mingle with Laura and several other amazing authors. I'll post details on social media and in the Literary Aviatrix newsletter, which you can sign up for through the link in the show notes. Please join us in the Aviatrix Book Club in February when we'll discuss a thriller novel set in the airline industry, Flight for Control by Carleen Pettit. I'd like to thank Shasta Ways and Michael Wilds of the Women Soar Group for their help in producing this interview. The Women Soar Group is a media company that gives women a platform to express themselves. Blue skies and happy reading.
And here I am, I'm ready to go again. I'm ready to say goodbye.